it, and how is it that you have come to know not one but four total Black women sergeants who are alleging similar behaviors of discrimination?
Well, thank you so much for having us this morning. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and your audience. So first, let me just say, there has been historically, I believe, and I think the facts show, an institutionalized system of discrimination within police departments, not just in Baltimore, but nationally. And I think here in Baltimore, it is being highlighted because of these 4 corresponding lawsuits that are really alleging patterns and practice of sex, race discrimination, as well as retaliation. Now, there are some slight nuances between the 4, right? 2 of them have pregnancy discrimination cases or components, which is one of the components in Sergeant Jean-Pierre's case. But I also want to mention that these are not just isolated incidents to these 4 brave women. In fact, I'm representing right now approximately 20 Baltimore police officers for various complaints. They're not in federal court. I actually have 6 lawsuits in federal court right now. 4 of them are Black women. 2 of them are Black men. One of them is actually a Haitian national origin case, who also identifies as an African-American man. And so it's really a system of the good old boy system in the blue wall of silence or the blue code of silence, depending on how people phrase it. And once you are outside of that bubble of protection, you get a target on your back. And that means it's kind of similar to the locker room talk that you hear, the locker room talk that you've heard about over time through a prior president's administration that came out, and it's similar conduct that's significantly inappropriate for a workplace. It's conduct that's very, very offensive to women, very offensive to people in general. And in fact, one of my cases, one of the sergeants has this lawsuit because he was standing up as an advocate for what he saw was the differential treatment of Black women officers and Black women sergeants. And as a result of him standing up for them, he was subsequently retaliated against. So it really is, I think, a play on the history of how women have been treated in the workplace, how women have been treated in the workforce, and how women have been treated when they're put in positions of power. These are sergeants. These are women officers who have done their time. All of them have had more than 10 years of experience on the force, specifically the Baltimore police force. And as a result of that, they have ascended. They have taken their sergeant's exams. They have done the work. They have put in the performance, and not without any backlash of being a woman, not without any sexually inappropriate comments, not without any sexual harassing behaviors, not without being called BITCHs, right? Which we recognize is a derogatory term towards women, not without having references made to their sex and gender. One of the plaintiffs specifically had told to her, "I've never been with a Black woman before. I'd like for you to be my first." So we're literally talking about the sexual objectification of women. And these are also experiences that Sergeant Jean-Pierre has had directly. Sergeant Jean-Pierre is a married woman, a married mother with children, and she has had some of these same experiences while pregnant. How offensive that is. How offensive that is.
Speak to the magnitude of this problem. The data bears it out. In addition to the cases that you referenced, we know that in Washington, D.C., there are 10 Black female officers, including the assistant police chief, who filed a class action lawsuit last fall against the Metropolitan Police Department, also alleging racial and gender-based discrimination. We are seeing across the country, even here in New York City, where 12 police officers came together to really sort of out what was happening, that they were being mandated to engage in their work in very racially discriminatory ways. And the backlash, the retaliation that they experience is absolutely incredible. When you think about not just Sergeant Jean-Pierre's statement, and, I got to be honest with you, as a racial justice attorney, I had a sliver of hope that if we got more of us in these departments, if we got more, and not just more of us, but more of us who were trained and prepared to go into these spaces to show up as change agents, to show up and change from within, even though I don't have a lot of faith in our ability to change from within. What I'm realizing as I'm listening to Sergeant Jean-Pierre is that as soon as you activate your change agency muscles from within the beasts of the police department, you have effectively triggered a whole other series of actions that are there to absorb whatever change agency you were trying to engage in and spit it back out at you, while they're also chewing you up and spitting you out of their mouth. As you look at this from someone who sits in a vantage point, you have a lot of experience with employment law and these types of discriminatory cases. What are your hopes for this lawsuit in terms of the benefit that you will be able to bring to your actual client? And do you have any hope that this case will actually produce any systemic change within the way police departments function, so that those of us on the outside who are thinking, well, okay, we have to have an outside and an inside strategy, we have to do both and make sure that, is there any hope for that as a possibility at all?
Well, Attorney Favors, as I'm sure you know, as a trial lawyer, you have to have hope, right? At the end of the day, a part of what we do is we reside in and we resolve in our hope that we can be change agents, that these litigations that we bring will in fact create and cause systemic change. What I can also tell you is I settled 2 cases against Baltimore Police Department in 2020.
Wow.
We are still dealing with many of the same exact issues. Some of them are still lingering from dates that preceded 2020. And I think the reality is, until there is a top-down approach, right? Not just having people in positions. I think the other reality is we do need more Black and brown sergeants and lieutenants and commanders in these police departments. But one thing I wanted to note, which is something Sergeant Jean-Pierre was talking about that I really want to highlight, it's not just about having bodies in place, right? People typically think there's this dichotomy of race, Black versus white. No, it's us against them, right? Until you become the target as a Black person. So what we will find in some of these lawsuits that have been filed, some of these administrative EEOC complaints, is some of the culprits look just like the victim, right? In terms of racial demographics. And that's because they are being used as cogs in a wheel, because they are self-acting in self-interest and they are self-serving themselves, because as long as it's almost kind of like a slave mentality. As long as you do what masses say, you will be protected. You might get in the house. You might get a little bit of dessert that night, right? And I mean, it's not to say that people do what they have to do, right? At the end of the day, as an employment lawyer, I understand that these are people's livelihoods at stake. But I think the reality is, and Sergeant Jean-Pierre, she can talk a little bit about this, there are people who will be a cog in the wheel to promote and perpetuate these systems of discrimination against people that look like them, against women that identify as women just like they do, but they are doing it out of self-interest, and they are doing it to protect themselves until those tables turn. And until those tables turn against them, now they too are being victimized, and they have a come to Jesus moment, or they have this realization or epiphany that, oh my gosh, I should have been doing something different, right? Not to say it's too little too late, but the victims, those who have been victimized, whether they're men, women, Latino, Black. I mean, I've talked to all sorts of officers who've been caught up in this unfortunate and tragic cycle of discriminatory treatment and retaliatory treatment, even if it's because they were trying to stand up for someone else. But I think the reality is, because people are trying to protect themselves, they see what's going on. People are not blind to these things, right? But they're looking out for their own self-interest. And some may say rightfully so, because at the end of the day, they have their own livelihoods and their own families to take care of. But that does not help at all. And until we have an overhaul of these type of mentalities, until we actually have meaningful conversations and not just throw money at problems, until we have effective systemic change, until we have these hard discussions with the leaders, until we have substantive sensitivity and diversity training, and we understand that this is not a locker room. this is a workplace, right? And just because it's majority men does not excuse it. We are not on a football field. And there are certain things that are appropriate in athletic team environments that may not be appropriate in corporate environments, like police departments, or professional environments like police departments. And so until we change our mentalities about these things, until people start recognizing that this is not just about my own self-interest, that's very short-sighted, until people realize that these are bigger problems that you can contribute to in very small ways. And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery to do that. But until we do these things, until people are willing to do these things, until the city council of Baltimore and these other jurisdictions are willing to really crack down on these issues and be heard. We understand cities got a lot of things going on, including Baltimore, but this is very important. It's a very paramount problem because these are officers who are sworn to serve and protect their communities. If they can't feel protected internally, how do you think that reflects their ability to police civilians? How do you think if they can't even respect Black women internally, their own sisters in blue, how do we think that's going to translate on the streets through a patrol officer or a commanding officer?
I think we're seeing clearly how that translates into the streets. And that's one of the reasons I'm so glad that you are there at the helm, really shepherding this case and working with your clients.